joining The Insider.
Sam and Meadows.
Very nice to see you again after, what, 20 years when I appeared on your PBS show.
22 years.
22 years. You were the
he knows everybody.
Idiosyncratic, contrarian conservative, and I guess I was a sensible centrist then.
Nothing has changed by those measures.
You are now probably the most vocal critic of the Iran war on the right, and I wanted to start with that because you've been pretty clear in your criticism. You called Operation Epic Fury absolutely disgusting and evil the first day. You also said that it was a war that could change world history.
It will.
And I wanted to start there because I wanted to help me understand how you think this war will change world history.
Yeah, it's something like 20% of the world's oil reserve comes out of that region, plus more. I mean, it's not only oil. So if Iran ends up having the Strait of Hormuz, that's going to be a massive shift in how the rest of the world operates. It doesn't really affect America that much, but it does affect Europe and especially the Asian countries and the GCC around it.
Control of the Persian Gulf is what 20% of the world's energy. That's what's at stake. Yep. That's why that's the main reason geopolitically it's a relevant part of the world, because those 7 countries, the 6 Gulf states and Iran, control once again probably 22% of the world's energy. And huge parts of the world, including huge parts of Asia, including our critical American allies in Asia, which would include or really be limited to Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, are wholly dependent on it because they don't have the resources domestically. So who controls that and the aperture on the eastern end, the now famous Straits of Hormuz, and also the entry to the Red Sea, like that's the same as controlling a lot of the world. And so that's what's at stake. And so we'll know who won or lost by who controls that by the end. That's the only measure. It's not the Iranian nuclear program, please. It's about access and control.
So I agree.
As far as I know, I'm pretty sure intel agencies like specifically stated that Iran wasn't even close to a nuclear bomb. So
with that, and we at The Economist have been very
obviously not about a nuclear bomb.
But you have already said that this would hand control of the Middle East to China. Why do you think that?
Game it out. First of all, I don't want that. I don't think it's good for the United States. I'm American. And I think the US has been an imperfect and increasingly short-sighted steward of its position as like hegemon. But I think there are ways to pull back from empire. There are ways to enter into power sharing agreements between East and West, which I think would be the wisest course at this point.
But just let me push you why you think it would hand it to China. It's
well,
true that
think about it.
Just let me because yes, there are very strong economic relationships, but China is a net energy importer. So right now, Iran is actually in a stronger position vis-a-vis China than it was before because it controls the Straits of Hormuz. Right. China hasn't shown any interest in having a military presence of the sort that the US has. It has one.
Doesn't need a military presence. It has an economic presence.
So I'm not at all sure China wants to take on that role. So I think when you say it's handing control of the Middle East to China, I'm not sure that you can really sort of
this
get
is,
that.
And with respect, this is the world.
There's a lot more you can do than just militarily. And obviously China wants that part of the world locked down. And to be honest, I don't give a shit. I would give it to them. I'm tired of being fucking over there.
View that squandered Western dominance, the idea that it is though. It's like, well, they don't have military bases. Well, maybe you don't want military bases. What you want is control. What you want is an outcome that benefits you and that minimizes threats to you. That's the goal. And so it's not obvious that they want to replace, the Fifth Fleet base in Bahrain, for example, with a Chinese naval base. I don't know. What they want is an advantage in commerce, number one, because they understand that ultimately that's what control really is. If you're getting to the point where you're having to exert force, you're displaying weakness.
Agreed.
And for the purposes of this, and really of life, the only question is who settles it.
Our government's been weak for a long time. That's why we do everything militarily.
It's very easy to start a conflict. A drunk teenager can punch you in the face.
And you think China's going to settle this?
I don't want China.
Let me tell you, I think right now the biggest winner is Russia, which is a country that you've never mentioned, actually, to my knowledge, in the last 10 days. Clearly, Russia is winning from the...
She's implying he's a Russian puppet.
Huge jump in oil prices. Russia is the one place where in the short term supply can be increased. Already, Treasury Secretary has lifted sanctions.
I'm aware of all of that.
So if someone says to me who's the big winner right now, I think the big winner is Russia.
Depend what's your timeline? Short term, for sure. But over time, a country with 150 million people is not going to run the world or even the West. It can have substantial influence in its region, and that's exactly where Russia is. Europe and the United States made a massive miscalculation by pretending we could change that. We can't. It's a civilization. It can't be dislodged. But it's not going to run the world, and it's not going to set the terms for global trade. It's definitely benefiting. The question right now is, how do you resolve the inherent conflict between the United States and China? Period. And we know that from Wikipedia just by looking at gross domestic product. Where's the economic power?
I don't see any appetite from China to come in and say, we're going to sort this out.
I don't think there is one at all right
now. So then how does this end?
Well, ultimately it ends because China has such obvious invested interest in the region.
Yes,
and
they
because
do.
there's such a massive advantage in being the settler of a conflict.
But let's just move on to Israel, because I think that's where, the central point of your argument is, which is that you have argued that this is a war.
By the way, whatever party Tucker Carlson is forming with MTG and Massey and all the people, Joe Kent, I am forever going to be a voter of that party. I am so fucking tired of the GOP and the DNC. It is disgusting how they've ran this country for ever. So, if anyone saw the other day, he posted a picture with MTG, Thomas Massey, Joe Kent, I think MTG's husband, and yeah, the meetings have started. Will they win? Probably not. It'll be like a Ross Perot thing, but it's going to do enough damage to the GOP to make the GOP change.
Israel's behest. And I think you've argued, if I've got this right, you made the point that Israel was doing this because it wanted the United States out of the region. Can you just talk me through that logic?
Well, let me just go to your first point. I wasn't arguing that the United States embarked on this at Israel's behest. I was noting it. And the Secretary of State has said that, the Speaker of the House has said that, the President of the United States has said it multiple times. Now,
when he answers this question, essentially stating that he believes Israel wants the United States out of the region, I think he's 100% correct on his take. I've heard it many times on his podcast, so he's just gonna retell what he's already said a billion times, but he's 100% right. We're the only people over there that tells Israel no, and that's why they want us out.
There's a kind of revisionism in progress where we say, well, we never said that. Well, you did say that, and it's on video. Also, I was talking to a lot of people while this decision was being made, and I can confirm what they've already said in public. Yes.
You're watching my interview with Tucker Carlson from March 2026.
Completely convincing, but let's
Back to the interview.
The United States was moved to act because the Prime Minister of Israel said to the President of the United States, I'm acting.
just hold that thought, because I want to come to that, because I'm not at all sure that I find that completely convincing. But let's just stick with
Of course, it's convincing. They said it.
The
President said so.
Marco Rubio also said so.
That are not true. Let's just stick with the argument.
They went in
why
because
you
Israel
think
said they were going in
Israel would
first.
want to do this so that the United States gets out of the Middle East.
The first thing you need to do.
The way Marco Rubio essentially summed it up was Israel said that they were going to go in first, and the United States had to respond to that because our soldiers that are just sitting out there would have been sitting ducks. So if we didn't proactively help Israel in that, then our soldiers would have just been attacked for no reason, and they wouldn't have been prepared for it, which is not an ally. That's not something an ally would do.
In order to understand why people are doing something, is to think about the world through their eyes. So let's just do that from the perspective of Israel for one moment. This is a nuclear-armed country, the only officially nuclear-armed country in the region that has an inherent drive to territorial expansion and for more resources.
Yep.
It doesn't make it different from any other country, Imperial Japan or any other country in a similar situation. This is an ascendant country with a leader who sees himself as a global leader, as he said last week. So what constrains them in that? Well, a couple of things, three things, really. One, most obviously, is Iran, which is a counterbalance to Israeli power, right? And also a funder of all kinds of regional problems for them, and Hamas and Hezbollah and all the rest, the Houthis. So you got to do something about Iran. You need a new regime, or you probably just need to do what they have done in all these other countries, cause chaos. Two, the Gulf states. Of course, the GCC, the 6 Gulf monarchies, because they're the biggest investors in the United States and they're the producers of all this energy. you cannot, number one, allow them to unite in any kind of like Gulf NATO. And two, you have to reduce their power. You've got your own new gas field, so it's like, and you've got Azerbaijan, so it's like you don't need them. And three, you have to get the United States out, because the United States has for 80 years constrained you.
Yep.
You're looking at me. This is like the most obvious thing I think I've ever said. You're looking at me like I'm speaking Swahili.
No, I honestly, I mean, I'm not quite speaking Swahili, but I'm listening to that. And when I first heard you say it on your podcast, I thought, does he really believe this? And you clearly do, and you've clearly explained it. But I find that explanation very hard to marry with what seems to me to be the reality of a country of 10 million people that has had, since its founding, the United States as its patron and ally, an absolutely essential ally. And I think actually if you read Prime Minister Netanyahu's autobiography, his entire political career has been based on understanding the importance of US support. I find it hard to believe that a country would want to kick out that support, to go it alone, or to go it with India, which is I think what you said in another podcast. I don't see the logic of that.
Does it have a choice?
Well, that's a different thing. You said because it wanted the United States out.
No, it has no choice.
Then,
because, and I'll tell you why. I know a lot about this topic because it's domestic American politics, and I read the polling every day.
And we're going to come on to that.
Well, I'm just going to say it now, which is support for Israel in the United States has collapsed.
Absolutely, but
and,
this is...
No, let me finish.
Yeah, he's not wrong. Support for Israel in the United States is completely gone. And the boomers are essentially the last generation that Israel has. And Israel knows that, which is why they put up things like 219 in the defense authorization bill.
It's collapsed. And the Israelis, who are acting in what they perceive to be their own interest, are very serious about this question. And I'm not guessing, but let me just say, I'm not guessing about this. And they understand that this is the last generation of American leaders who will support them financially and with defense guarantees uncritically, which is to say, without really constraining their territorial ambitions. They know that because they're not dumb, and it's coming to an end. And that's one of the reasons that the Prime Minister of Israel went to the White House 7 times in 1 year and was pretty open about what he was doing there. I'm advocating for a regime change war against Iran. Now, if you were hoping to continue the relationship unto the generations, you probably wouldn't say that in public. But if you decided this is coming to an end, there's nothing we can do, let's get what we can while we can, you would do that.
Well, you could also conclude that you thought Iran posed an existential risk to you as a country. You may disagree with that, but you might think that. And then you'd think, actually, I want to bring... That? I do, actually.
Existential in what sense?
In the sense that you have a regime in Iran that has called for death to Israel, has never believed in Israel as a Jewish homeland country, and would rather not have Israel there. Yeah, I think that's is reasonable.
That's really your analysis?
I do think that that is part of it, yes. And I think it is a reasonable feeling for a lot of people in Israel to have, not just people in Likud or Bibi Netanyahu. I don't think that justifies or makes sensible an attack on Iran, but I think that is a reasonable, and also for me then, you would therefore not, you would want to continue to have the support of your biggest ally for as long as you could.
She looks stunned.
If you were planning this war, and
just minor questions Tucker's asking.
Your patron to embark on this war, to use its military to achieve your ends, which is exactly what's happened, you would think through what are the consequences of this. And the first thing you would understand is there's no support for this in the United States, zero. And there's just public polling on this, so we know that. There's no support for Americans dying. This country, the debt to GDP ratio is so out of whack, we're totally out of money. We can't afford it. And so you would know that if this actually happened, people in the United States would be mad at you. And there would be ultimately calls to get out of the Middle East entirely. It would not be sustainable, our presence in the Middle East over time, if you did this. You would also know that we had an operation in June, which they also forced. Bibi called on Monday and said to the President of the United States, I'm doing this week. That's why we did it. And you could say that you can constrain Iran. You could live with this thing that you fear. But instead, we're going to embark on a war whose most likely outcome is chaos in Iran.
Well, can I just stop you there?
Yes.
Because you're predicating this on the war being a failure. And you could perfectly well reframe your argument as being Prime Minister Netanyahu has long wanted, we know this, he said this in public, he said this to everyone, long wanted to have regime change in Iran, but certainly to get rid of Iran's nuclear capability. Absolutely pushed for that. It is possible that he thought and thinks that that can be done, and that he convinced the president that it could be done. And let's just move on to this
no,
now,
I think
because
he
I
did.
think
But what was the Israeli
can
plan?
I just ask this, because this is really important, I think. You, in your explanations,
You're making
basically
excuses
give
for
me-
Israel and then say, but another question.
I'm not
Well, of
making
course you
excuses.
are. Yes,
No,
you
because
are.
you started this by saying that
I'm trying to see the world through their eyes.
we're both trying to do that. We're both trying to analyze, I think,
Yes.
where things are going. And key to your analysis is that Israel, in your view, an expansionist Israel, pushed America into a war whose consequence would be America leaving the region. That's, I think, a reasonable summary of what you've been saying to
And
me.
the destruction of the Gulf states. Well, I think that's a critical part of it.
So that's your analysis.
Israel just bombed Qatar's gas field this morning.
That's your
okay.
analysis. Can we just talk about the focus of Israel and Israel driving the decision in the United States? Because I think that's a key part
know
of
a lot about it,
I
and
know,
I
I
don't
know you
think
do.
it's
That's why I want to ask you
disputable.
about it.
Yes.
And you have argued to me just now, and you've argued a lot, that Israel essentially hoodwinked or persuaded or told President Trump what to do against President Trump's better interests. And you know the president very well. You went to see him, as I understand.
I think Israel has something very bad on Trump. You can say that's Epstein, or you could say it's something else, but yeah, I think Israel is blackmailing the absolute fuck out of Donald Trump.
Several times before this. Do you really believe President Trump would be bullied or pushed into doing something he didn't want to do by Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I love how you've constrained the question. Let me tell you what I do
I
know,
love Tucker.
and then you can characterize it as you wish. I don't fully understand the president's thinking, as I don't understand any other person's thinking fully. How could you? I can only tell you what I know to be true, which is in June, at the outset of the 12-day war, the Prime Minister of Israel called the
Real quick, look at that. No socks and some, I don't even know what he has on, but those look nice. It's wild. I love it.
White House on secure video conferencing into the Situation Room and said, we are moving this week against Iran's nuclear facilities. And by the end of the week, by Thursday, he had. And that was followed shortly after by U.S. backup, which was inevitable, right? Because we have a defense guarantee implied with Israel. And we also have a lot.
Was it inevitable? I mean, previous presidents have said no.
That's a very smart point. No, it was not inevitable. Once Israel began its attacks on Iran, then American involvement was, yes, inevitable.
But at the end of the 12 days, the president said, bring those jets back.
That
so
is
President Trump
exactly
has
right.
had
He
agency
constrained-
over Prime Minister
That is
Netanyahu.
exactly what happened. Now, some of us argued this is preparatory to a much larger effort that will attempt to achieve what they sought to achieve the first time, which was regime change. And the president, I believe, was fully aware, and if you said it yourself, Israel wanted a different regime in Tehran, okay? Why wouldn't they? They had no plan for what that regime would be. That's a fact. I don't think they've claimed they had a plan. They just want chaos. They just don't want the people in charge. And if it breaks into a constellation of countries and devolves into a permanent ethnic civil war, that's fine with them. By the way, you can deal with the refugee crisis. Good luck. But that is all true.
But for real,
Then we fast forward to
England's
this
going to be the
winter
one to
and
suffer.
Several more trips to Washington by Benjamin Netanyahu. And once again, Benjamin Netanyahu said to the White House, we are going. Now, I happen to know this is true, but you don't need to take my word for it because the President of the United States said it. The Secretary of State said it.
Yeah.
And then he went on to say, on camera, we have all these assets in the Gulf. There are hundreds of thousands of Americans in the region. We have all these military bases and we have energy. And then the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, also said it on camera. It's all available on the internet. And this just happened in the last 2 weeks.
But do you not think the President of the United States could have chosen to say, no, you're not?
And that is the question, and I cannot answer that question. But clearly,
But that's important because the argument argument that you are making is that somehow this was foisted on the United
I'm
States.
not making an argument.
Yeah, he's
You
not
said
making
this
an
again
argument
and
at all.
again.
It's not an argument. It's an observation. I'm repeating
his
what the
point of view.
President, the Secretary of State, and the Speaker of the House, the three most powerful people in the United States, have all said on
But there are plenty
camera.
of things that the President of the United States.
He is forming the America First Party right now. So this is the man I want leading that party. I would vote for Tucker. I think Tucker holds a majority of opinion, like the majority opinion of the right in our country. I really do. And if he doesn't, it's because the boomers are still here. Once they're gone, then he will have the majority view.
Says that do not merit being taken at face value.
I don't understand. The president and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, have all said Israel was going first, and so we went in because we have critical interest in protecting Israel. We have a critical interest in the Gulf. We have critical interest in our bases. Like, I don't understand.
But this was
what
a
are we missing?
decision by the President of the United States.
It certainly was.
And the President of the United States could have made a different decision. And let me suggest to you that there are other reasons why the President of the United States made this. One might have been hubris after the success of the operation to remove.
I'm not sure what we're arguing about. I mean,
because the way you present this and the way it is presented by many people is that somehow a very powerful Israel and a very powerful Jewish and Israeli lobby is pushing policies in this administration
well, I'm not
that are
responsible,
against
I guess,
America's
for what other
national
people
interests.
say. I'm telling you what I saw and what the president and Attorney General, Secretary of State, and the Speaker have all said publicly, and what everyone who's followed this knows, because it's all out there. Okay, it's public source. Israel said we're going to move, and the United States reacted by joining them and then engaging in a partnership, a military partnership. I think it's the first time it's happened since the Second World War. And there are all kinds of problems that come down from that. But you raised the correct question. That's not a slander. That's not anti-Semitism. That's what actually happened. And so I don't know what to say. I don't write the script.
No, but do you think the President of the United States had agency in it?
Well, of course the President
of
of the United States
the President of the United States made a mistake, in your view, in doing this?
Well, of course I think that. I've said
and
that.
And it wasn't.
Let me just restate it. I'm not making an argument that Israel said to the United States, we will go whether you want to or not. Okay? That's been confirmed. That's not an argument. I'm repeating what our leaders have already told us. Your question is,
what we should have done is once they said we're going, whether you're coming or not, we should have said, okay, have fun. That's it. And then let the Israelis deal with the repercussions. That is the main argument that most people in this country have. And then we're called anti-Semitic or anti-Jew or anti-Israel, whatever the fuck they want to say. Just let them deal with this themselves. It's not our fucking problem. We're $40 trillion in debt. We cannot afford to be over here anymore.
Well, isn't it still Trump's fault because he made the decision to go along with this? He allowed himself to go along with this. Of course, he's the commander-in-chief. And my argument would be, and has been, to him and to anyone else who will listen, that's the moment when you constrain your ally. And you say, no, we pay for everything. I've said this 100 times, and that's considered anti-Semitic.
I haven't said anything about anti-Semitic.
Well, I've certainly been accused of that when I'm not in any sense anti-Semitic. I'm not even anti-Israel. I'm pro-America, and you cannot allow, as I've said 100 times, let me say it again, you cannot allow a country of 9 million to make decisions that are critical to a country of 350 million. That would be us. That's against nature, it's wrong, and it's against America's interest, as this war is. And so, of course, it's incumbent on
Can I just stop you there? Because you said you cannot allow a country of 9 million to make decisions for a country.
Correct.
But you are implying then that Israel did make decisions for the United States. And
they
my
did,
point
by
is
going in.
That there is much more agency in the United States
I understand this
and in the Trump
a very
administration.
important point for you. Yes, and let me just say it again. Trump made the decision. And I have said, I said then, I said before it happened to him, and I'll say it again now with him not in the room, I think you have to say no. Okay? I think you have to say no.
And so
you have to say no.
What did he say to you?
I'm not, it's not up to, I'm not going to characterize what he said.
Why do you think he didn't say no?
The short answer is I don't know. And if I did know, I would just say so.
In your copious podcasting about this in the last 2 weeks, you have made the argument very strongly that the United States has been pushed into something not in its own national interest by pressure from Israel and the lobbying power of Israel.
Well, it has been. The question is whether the person who makes the ultimate decision, who would be President Trump, should have pushed back. That's it. Of course.
He should have.
Of course, Trump should have pushed back.
As previous presidents have done.
But he got hundreds of millions of dollars from Miriam Adelson for his campaign. So obviously he wasn't going to push back against Israel, Netanyahu, any of them.
To some extent, some very limited extent, George W. Bush didn't push back. We wound up in the.
If you guys made it this far, thank you for watching. And if you can, please like and subscribe. It would really help me out. Thanks, everyone.